Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to another edition of the All Out Leadership Podcast. We're in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, the last chapter here on the life of David, and we see David's last to-do. And so if this is the big last thing on David's to-do list, kind of his last bucket list item, I think we could learn a lot from it. I want to highlight what it was not. It wasn't a world vacation. Nothing wrong with that. It wasn't, I'm going to go take 6 months off and go sit on a beach. Again, nothing wrong with that. But I think this highlights why David truly is a man after God's own heart and why he was the standard by which God measured every other king in Israel. And I think this is what touches God's heart. 1 Chronicles 29:2. Now for the house of my God I have prepared with all my might gold for things to be made of gold, silver for things of silver, bronze for things of bronze, iron for things of iron, wood for things of wood. Moreover, because I have set my affection on the house of my God, I have given to the house of my God over and above all that I have prepared for the holy house, my own special treasure of gold and silver. I think David was truly a man after God's own heart because what we always see is David had a heart for God's house. And so David understood that as king, God had blessed him, that everything he had was from God, for God. And we even see this is really the last recorded psalm of praise we see in the life of David. He continues after this, and he says in verse 12, both riches and honor come from you, and you reign over all. David realizes that all the wealth that he had, God gave him the power to get that wealth. So as you're building your empires of leadership, influence, product, business, market share, just remember, God gave you the power to build that empire, to build your business, not just to be a blessing to you, but that you might be a blessing to God's house. And so David always kept in mind God's house. So as you're building your company, as you're succeeding, be like David and just go, hey, I'm going to be helping build God's house. I'm going to be generous towards God's house. I'm going to give financially and generously to God's house. Now, this may sound a little self-serving coming from a pastor, but I think it's worth saying because it's kind of what we really see in the life of David, and that is he realized he couldn't take it with him, so he's going to send it ahead of him. And so what he said is, I'm going to leave a large legacy gift to build the church. And so he said, before I die, I'm going to make sure I'm taking a portion of my wealth. Yes, I'm leaving some for my kids, and yes, I'm leaving some for my family, but the greatest cause I can leave it for is building the kingdom of God and putting it into God's house. So I would encourage you, as you're growing, as you're succeeding, consider meeting with your attorney, as you're estate planning, as you're working out your will and your trust, that you would go, I want to leave a portion of what I've made to the church, to God's house, so that that can continue to grow and flourish as I'm gone. If you've been a large contributor to an organization and then you pass away, that organization is going to miss that consistent gift that you were giving. And so it's a way for you to go, you know what? I don't want them to miss me because I'm going to just go ahead and leave a legacy gift to help kind of fill in that gap that I was filling through my consistent contribution to whatever organization that is. As a Christ follower, I highly recommend the first place you should be considering is your local church where you're getting fed, that's been feeding your family, taking care of you. And again, that's what David did. He put his heart and his energy into the house. And I know it sounds self-serving, but it still is a true statement. You never see a hearse pulling a U-Haul and you can't take it with you. And so one of the greatest things you can do is put it into the house of God, where God's house is continuing to reach people long after you've been with Jesus. Some food for thought. Look forward to seeing you as we wrap up our last lesson next week on the life of David. And we're going to talk about a chain reaction.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.